Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Stimmick Bailey from the travel blog Valerie and Valise. You may know me as that blogger who talks all about Alaska travel and parts of the rest of the American West. I actually grew up in the Anchorage area, and this video is part of my Alaska seminar series for 2025. So if you have followed me for any length of time, you know that I pretty much just love talking about Alaska. And every year or two, I sit down with some of my favorite destinations, experts, locals from those areas, and get all the information you need to know to visit and any relevant new information that might be important if you're planning to visit next year. So we're recording this at the end of 2024, talking about 2025. It is going to be up forever. So if you are visiting in a future year and you don't see a newer video, feel free to give this one a full watch and see that there's any information that you might need. Before we launch into the presentation by Jack from Visit Anchorage, just want to point out this is pre-recorded. So I've collected questions from my community. We will go through those at the end of the session. If you have any other questions, you are welcome to post them in the comments. If I cannot answer them based on my own knowledge and experience, I will reach out to the team at Visit Anchorage and have them jump in to make sure you get whatever information that you need. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jack. So the floor is all yours.
Well, thanks so much, Valerie. And I just want to start. You picked an awesome photo to begin with. This is a stained glass artwork that hangs in our convention center, the Denina Convention Center. And I just want to start by saying that I'm joining you guys from the Denina Athabascan homeland. I'm really grateful to live and work and play in a place that has been maintained by the Denina people for thousands of years. So we're really grateful for their stewardship of the land, the waters, and the wildlife that sustains the Anchorage area. And it's also not every day that I get to do this with a fellow Alaskan, so I'm really excited. Anchorage is my adopted hometown. I've lived here. I've considered it home for decades now, and I've actually started a family, and so I've got little Alaskans running around as well. Um, yeah, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to kind of to share what's going on in Anchorage and what's new. I know it's been a little while since we did one on Anchorage specifically, and it feels like there's a lot that's changed. And in preparing for this, trying to get your arms around all of the stuff that's happened just in the last couple of years in such a big and diverse place is really um, it's mind-boggling. So here we go. I mean, I kind of wanted to give everybody just a sense of what our community is about, and I think it's easiest to do it with this shot from the air. I mean, this is kind of the sense of place that you get when you are arriving. So typically, as the plane descends, they say, we're about to make our descent into Anchorage. You'll do that right over Prince William Sound. So if you're watching out the window, you'll see the glaciers out in College Fjord go by. You'll see the Chugach Range, which is this big mountain range in the back. And then Cook Inlet, the body of water that's on kind of two sides of the triangle that makes up the Anchorage Bowl, and then Sleeping Lady and the greenscape of the city itself. I think that's what really strikes a lot of people when they first come here, and they've got Alaska in their minds as either one of two things: either Anchorage is the big city and Alaska exists someplace else, or maybe that it's Alaska, so there's no such thing as a city. And what we find for Anchorage is we're really trying to talk them from one of those two extremes into the real perception of what Anchorage is, and it's both things. Um, our city, our community covers about 1,961 square miles. So not just Anchorage, the bowl that you see in this picture, but as far south as Portage Glacier and as far north as the native village of Eklutna. To the east, so you've got these Chugach Mountains. The foothills rise into a couple thousand feet tall right away. It's one of the largest state parks in the nation. I'm excited to talk about that. It's one of my favorite places on planet Earth. Um, and it's not very far away. People think of adventures in the outdoors in Alaska as something that requires an expedition. Many of the trailheads for the Chugach are within 15 to 20 minutes of downtown, where I'm sitting right now. Um, what you don't see in this photo is Cook Inlet. So we're basically flying directly over Cook Inlet, which is this big body of water that feeds into the Gulf of Alaska and into the Pacific Ocean. It kind of splits in two right where Anchorage is. So uh, outside of downtown, you're looking into Knik Arm, and then as you drive south from Anchorage towards the smaller communities of Girdwood and Portage, you're driving along Turnagain Arm, and it means that you kind of get a little bit of everything. You get the mountains to the one side and the water to the other. So I think that's part of the reason that it draws so many people and keeps so many people engaged. So the basics of Anchorage: we're a relatively large community for Alaska, but that's not saying a whole lot. There's just under 300,000 people that live in Anchorage. That's about 40% of the state's population. So it sounds like a really big, impressive number to us as Alaskans, but not a huge place as far as other people are concerned. But our residents aren't just people. We have about 1,500 resident moose just in Anchorage itself, not to mention black and brown bears and eagles and Dall sheep and the occasional lynx. And then we've got king and silver salmon that are swimming up Ship Creek. So our residents are not just human either. It's kind of a weird contrast. I mean, we have the one of the largest airports, the largest airport in Alaska, but also the fourth busiest cargo hub for air traffic on the planet. So there's a lot of air connectivity. Um, but we also have stuff like access to 135 miles of paved trails and 8,000 hotel rooms. The numbers are really weird. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a little bit of everything that's on your must list for Alaska combined with everything that you need to stay comfortable. So I think the thing that's been interesting in the last couple of years for us is to have more and more people have this aha moment of saying, I thought Anchorage was the gateway to Alaska. And what we can really do is build a getaway in Anchorage and get all of those things that are on my list and stay comfortable while we're doing it. Just in terms of transportation, we've got the largest seaplane base, the biggest hub for the Alaska Railroad, and we're at the center of highway travel. So there are a lot of ways to get around, but a lot of reasons to stay too. One of the reasons to stay, I love this photo because it looks like something where you had to like parachute into this remote backcountry area. This is one of those trailheads that's 15 minutes from my home. So this is something we do after work. Um, a lot of people think about Alaska and they think about access to the national parks, and Anchorage has that. We like to think of it as there are about 5 national parks that are really the best and easiest to get to from Anchorage. Lake Clark and Katmai on the far side of Cook Inlet for bear viewing. Wrangell St. Elias on the drive along the Chugach, but especially the Kenai Fjords and Denali. I think what people skip over when they say let's go to the national parks is they skip over the Chugach Mountains, which are far and away the local favorite. Um, so it's filled with trails, with glaciers, with rivers and wildlife. This is where we as Alaskans go to unwind and enjoy the outdoors. It's a huge mountain range, kind of overlaps the eastern edge of the city. So once you get into the foothills, you're kind of into some of the smaller neighborhoods. And I think what's really interesting about it is it's about 500, it's about 500,000 acres, and that's just a state park. It's one of the largest state parks in the country. I think it's third or fourth, depending on how you count. And then when you get to the far end of that state park, it turns into a national forest. I guess the other thing I wanted to pause and talk about is, so often we jump to trails as being something that has to be in a state park. I think that first photo that I showed you really shows just how much green space there is. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a trail called the Moose Loop. So Anchorage itself, before you get to the state park, has a paved trail network that's about 135 miles long. And it actually connects all the way around, goes all the way down the coast on the coastal trail, comes back through town. And if you look at the outline of it, it's actually shaped like a moose. So the face and the ears. And that's something that has been knit together in the last year or two that I find really interesting about coming to Anchorage. So we talked a little bit about the outside already. What I don't want to skip past is all of the cool arts and cultural attractions that Anchorage has. The Alaska Native Heritage Center is one of the best places to start learning about Alaska Native cultures. And it's not something that exists behind museums glass. This is something that's kind of a living, breathing, multiple cultures. That's the other thing. We started with the Dena'ina Athabascan land acknowledgement, but I think it's important to think about Alaska Native cultures as not just the Dena'ina Athabascans that traditionally lived here, but all of the other Alaska Native indigenous cultures that are now represented here in Anchorage. And there are a bunch of different ways that you could think about these things. The way that the Alaska Native Heritage Center starts to break them up is by regions of Alaska. And they like to say that there are 5 major regions of Alaska. Keep in mind that even inside of those, there are multiple traditions and cultures and languages. But the Alaska Native Heritage Center is really a great place to start unpacking what each of those cultures is like, the traditions that overlap, and the things that make them different and unique. they have so many languages and stories and songs to get into. They also have full-sized examples of traditional building methods, so you can actually walk through what an indigenous house in Southeast Alaska looked like, or a Denina log cabin from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and you really get a sense of each of these things as a sense of place. And then we're also the home of the largest museum in the state of Alaska, the Anchorage Museum. And that means that we've got history and art collections with not only in Alaska, but a global Arctic perspective, as well as the Smithsonian Arctic Studies Center, which is just hundreds of Alaska native pieces, everyday tools, masks, art. And most interesting to me is that each one of those items in the Smithsonian has a story attached to it. So many decades ago now, uh, all of these things existed at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Most of them were off display. There was actually a huge project that brought Alaska Native elders from all over the state to say, what are these things? How are they made? How are they used? What's the significance? So the items that are on display in the Anchorage Museum, they tend to be pieces that were identified by the people from those cultures as saying, this is the most culturally significant piece of this. You have to make sure that the story of this individual item is told. I've been going there for decades now, I can proud to say, and every time I've gone into the Smithsonian, I've found a piece that I've just not seen before. And it's just, there's so much in there. It's so amazing. And every once in a while you go, that's been here this whole time. And I've never had the moment to appreciate the craftsmanship and the ingenuity that went into making it. So these are really the two big cultural attractions for Anchorage. But there's a whole, just a wide spray of art galleries and showrooms and artist workspaces. Um, I'd say one of the things that you might notice about Anchorage now, if you only visited, say, like 4 or 5 years ago, is there's been just an absolute explosion in the amount of public art in the form of murals and statues. So Drew Michael has this huge piece on the side of the Kobuk, which is one of the oldest buildings in Anchorage, that's a mural of one of the masks that he's made. Crystal Worrell, just outside of the Denina Center, has this huge, huge mural on the side of the building that's between our convention center and City Hall, that blends together all of her cultures. So not only Athabascan, but also far north. And yeah, it's just an amazing mixture of stuff, and it really gives you a sense of place. But I think downtown in particular, there's just an absolute ton of murals all of a sudden. We talked a little bit about trails, but I want to make sure that anybody who's saying like I'm not a hiker or that's not my kind of thing understands that when we enjoy the outdoors in Alaska, and we do that in a lot of different ways. And some of those are very, very outdoor oriented and very activity driven, but there's also a lot of ways that you can see Anchorage and Alaska without really having to lift a finger. So for somebody like me, you're going to hear me go on and on about being able to hike on trails and go running and ride my bike all over the community. Um, but that's not to say you got to sweat to do this stuff. As much as I like being out on Spencer Glacier, that left-hand side, the kayak picture, um, you can do something that's a little bit more chill too. I think what I like about Anchorage is there's you can kind of dial that up and down as much as you want. So there's always going to be somebody who's going to go harder than you. Like I'm not going to be keeping up with the mountain runners out there, but I can do my thing. And if I don't feel like doing that today, that picture in the lower left, that's Ship Creek. That's about 10 minutes away from where I'm sitting in downtown Anchorage, and it's a king and silver salmon run right in the heart of the downtown. Um, I think I alluded to this already, but we've got one of the largest seaplane bases in the world. I think something like 1 in 15 people in Alaska is a licensed pilot. Um, those pilots like to show people around. We have a huge amount of companies that do sightseeing tours at a Lake Hood seaplane base or out of Merrill Field. Float planes are like the classic way for Alaskans to get around. If it's not connected by road or by rail, you're either going there in a boat or you're going in a plane. And then, like I said, we also have the Alaska Railroad. Um, we're at the center of most of the trips that they do. The one in the picture there, that's Bartlett Glacier. That's actually one of my favorite Alaska Railroad trips. It's the train south from Anchorage through Girdwood and to a place called Grandview, which was not named by a guy named Mr. Grandview. It is there's a reason they call it Grandview. It's just an amazing mountain valley. The train has all of these little teeny tiny tunnels that they punched back at the turn of the century, and it's just an amazing place to go. Um, there are a lot of times traveling in Alaska, and not very far from where I live, where you just have to pause and realize that you're in a place that a lot of people would give a lot of things to just be in for a couple of minutes, and that doesn't get old even as somebody who lives here all the time. ATVs, another great way to get around if you're not looking to expend your own energy. That picture is actually Eklutna Lake, which is about 45 minutes north of here. I want to talk a little bit more about them in a while. There's been a really incredible amount of growth in Eklutna. It's always been a really great place to go kayaking. They alternate days, so you can ATV on some days or hike or horseback ride on other days. This is really a nice place, and it's about 14 miles long, so you can go quite a ways on an ATV. But again, it's just one of those incredible places. I was able to take a family member of mine kayaking for the very first time at Eklutna last summer, and it's just, again, it sticks with you when you find one of those places. I'm not going to go on and on sharing my own wildlife photos. I almost added, I've got a couple of pictures from my backyard of the moose and the black bears specifically, and then some coyotes and some lynx that we see now and again. Spend a couple of days traveling in Anchorage, and you're likely to see a moose. You're likely to see Dall sheep up over Turnagain Arm. But there are also a couple of shortcuts to wildlife viewing too. So the Alaska Zoo here in South Anchorage, it's not just Alaska animals, and they do have black, brown bear, moose, eagles, all the biggies. But the interesting thing about the Alaska Zoo is they focus on animals from similar climates. So they also have an Amur tiger from Siberia. They have camels and yaks, and it's also one of the only places this far south in Alaska where you can see a polar bear. And then this photo is actually taken from the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center in Portage. They have three brown bears, and I think this is Hugo, if I remember right. They're all very, very photogenic. But the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center in Portage, it's really a wonderful, it's a huge place, first of all. They have some of the largest enclosures anywhere in North America for wildlife. Every animal that's come to them is either injured or orphaned or otherwise wouldn't be able to make it in the wild. So it's a really wonderful place for animals that wouldn't have a home otherwise, but also for us as humans to be able to see them in ways that we wouldn't need to or necessarily want to if we were traveling out in the wild. So they have three brown bears. They have a couple of black bears, including Kobuk, who is kind of like the darling. He arrived as a little cub and he has gotten bigger and bigger, but is still adorable. They've got wolves and muskox and wood bison, which are an animal that I don't think a lot of people are super familiar with. So wood bison historically had this huge range all over Alaska and then went extinct. And actually, they thought they were extinct completely in North America. And about 30 or 40 years ago, maybe 50 at this point, someone found a small herd of them in northern Canada. And they've since been able to rebuild the wood bison population in Alaska. So the Wildlife Conservation Center in Portage is home to a huge herd of them. And then a few years ago, they were actually able to release wood bison in the wild up north of us towards Fairbanks in a place called the Innoko River. And so they actually have wild wood bison out in Alaska again. One of the curators at the Wildlife Conservation Center once told me that wood bison used to roam as far north, as far south as Anchorage. And the reason they know that is because they found a fossilized skull outside of Ship Creek right here in Anchorage. So it's really incredible to think that an animal that's been living in Alaska since like literally the Ice Age is just out there back in the wild again. Speaking of Ice Age, I got to give a shout out to my favorite, muskox. They're weird, they're amazing. They've been around for longer than we have. Again, another like hardy Ice Age survivor that's just cool that they're still hanging out in Alaska. Like I alluded to, there's a lot that's changed in the last couple of years. For hotels in particular, I think it's a really exciting time for Anchorage. Like I said, we have about 8,000 hotel rooms. We're about to add a couple more small properties. There's another one coming online in Midtown. The one that's really, really fascinating to me is a place called the Wildbirch Hotel, which has already started with a soft opening. It's right here downtown off of 4th Avenue. When they're all said and done with their renovations, there'll be 252 rooms. It's a really amazing they did an incredible job. It's really designed forward, and it's in the heart of Fourth Avenue. Fourth Avenue is kind of like our main street for Anchorage. And they're adding a street side restaurant, a lobby bar, a brewery deal with one of the local brewers, which I'm very excited about. And then a shop and some incredible outdoor patios that I think will be really great when it comes to like Ferrandi and fireworks. The Hilton Anchorage, they're actually started their renovations about about October of 2024, and they'll be redoing their lobby for the new year, and then they'll go through the that's phase one is their renovated lobby, and then they'll go floor by floor, update the entire hotel, including the top of the world restaurant and bar. Which, if you're an old timey Alaskan, the top of the world is literally the top of this huge tower in downtown Anchorage. The views are phenomenal. It'll be incredible to have that back as an opportunity. And then a couple of smaller properties as well. If you're looking for something that's really just a sense of Alaska, a place like Snob Hollow, it's in walking distance. If you've ever been to Anchorage, it's just downhill from 49th State Brewing Company. It's kind of sandwiched in between downtown Anchorage and the railroad depot. And it's a 3-story property. I think they've got 8 guest rooms, and one of them is a 3-bedroom penthouse. And I've been in there, and it's an incredible look at over the inlet. If you're wondering about Snob Hollow as a name, the owner told me that that whole street actually had that name back in 1915. The snobs, the well-to-do residents, built their homes when the town site was laid out in 1915 along this row. So the next door neighbor is actually one of the historic properties where a former Anchorage mayor lived back in the 19 teens and 20s. Also downtown, another small kind of boutique property. They've done a lot with like digital check-in and just making things really slick. It's the Highliner Hotel. They're about 16 rooms, and they opened, I think, right at the beginning of the summer of 2023. One of the owners, his whole family has a fishing background, so there's a bunch of nods to fishing in the decor. All of their boxes in the shop in the lobby are old salmon roe boxes, and then there's a bunch of like Japanese fishing floats. It's just a really cool room decor. One other smaller property way north of us at Eklutna, where that ATV shot was, BlueWater BaseCamp just opened, and they've got several micro cabins that are open near the lake. So each cabin has a kitchenette, a bathroom, some really great Chugach Mountain views, and you are pretty much the only people out there. They also just completed a small gathering space. So if you're looking for a place to hold like a wedding or a reception, or if you just want to do group dinners, there's a couple of spots that they have. And then I think the last time that we talked specifically about Anchorage, we were all hot to trot about the Nordic Spa at Alyeska. That's where this photo was taken. So still an incredible place, hot and cold plunge pools. What's interesting about Alyeska is they didn't stop when they opened the very first Nordic spa in all of Alaska. So they've got a hotel within a hotel concept that they unveiled a little bit earlier this year. It's a Black Diamond Club, and it's a fully renovated top floor. It's about 36 rooms. So it's kind of like this very exclusive experience inside of what was already one of the nicest resorts in the state of Alaska. They also got a 2,000 square foot presidential suite if you're willing to go big. And then they'll actually be renovating most of the rooms. Actually, they've done a portion of them already. I've been to the Alyeska Nordic Spa a couple of times. It's just really incredible to see all of these plunge pools and whirlpools and saunas. And they're not done yet. They are actually in the middle of doing a multi-year plan that'll do public areas, new restaurants, expanded bars, and then some community-facing stuff as well, which is really encouraging. Okay, so that's enough about hotels. Let's talk about what we're actually going to do while we're there. I already made reference to the Alaska Native Heritage Center. What I didn't tell you is that they just finished their first phase of renovations. So they reopened with the Gathering Place and the Hall of Cultures. They also are separate. They celebrated their 25th year. So this was really an opportunity for them to take everything that made Alaska Native Heritage Center great and really expand and improve on what was there. So coming into the front door and being able to walk down into the gathering space where all of these performances and storytelling and sport demonstrations are, it's really grounding. Speaking of Alaska Native cultures, my friend Shane opened a tour called Blueberry Tours. It's a private sightseeing guide who's based here in Anchorage. He's a longtime resident, and he's also his background is Inupiaq, so he's able to kind of share Anchorage, Whittier, and Hatcher Pass. Not only indigenous culture, but also his relationship with modern Alaska, which I think is something that is a growing trend that we'll talk to a little bit later. If anybody's familiar with the big red trolleys from the Anchorage trolley tours, they've added a couple of tours as well. So now they have what they're calling the Salmon Express, which stops in at one of the fish hatcheries locally. And then their Winter City tour is actually a 3.5 hour ride that includes a giant, and I mean didn't fit in the convention center's giant snowman called Snowella. And then, of course, this picture takes us back down to Girdwood and to Alyeska. This is Veilbreaker Sky Bridges at Alyeska Resort. So it's already had a couple thousand guests come through it. It's suspended about 2,500 feet above the valley floor. And so you're harnessed in, you're roped in. Valerie, I can see you laughing. Are you going to do it? I'll do it if you do it. It is really an incredible. And if this freaks anybody out and you say, oh, that's not my cup of tea, what I would recommend is just go to Alyeska and take the aerial tram up to the top. You get some amazing summit views, and you don't necessarily need to have a hard hat and a harness. If this isn't your thing, don't worry, there's some incredible views out here for you anyway. A little bit closer in, speaking of mountains though, Hilltop Ski Area is kind of the community ski area for Anchorage. They've continued to just reinvent themselves and reinvest. They've upgraded their ski runs. They've gone really big into summer lift assisted downhill mountain biking, and they have a pump track that's kid friendly. They've also added Finn's Kitchen, which has a huge restaurant, and it makes it just a really incredible place. They've dabbled in hosting live music. It's just an incredible place to be. I won't go through all of these, but I did want to call out that if you're just lost for what days to come and visit Anchorage, these are kind of the short list of some of the bigger celebrations for us. The one that you'll want to look out for next year in 2025, we're actually just about to start our first hay days. Hay is the Dena'ina Athabascan word for winter. And what we've tried to do is there's a ton of stuff that happens in Anchorage from like the very end of November to the very beginning of January. And it's something that we as locals have really enjoyed, but we don't think that people understand that there's all this stuff to see and do in Anchorage during that time. So just to give you a sense, you've got the holiday tree lightings. Solstice, winter solstice is a huge thing for Alaskans because we start gaining daylight back again. So the shortest day of the year in Anchorage is about 6 hours from sunrise to sunset, and that's in December. And then every day after that, we're gaining that little bit back. And by March, we'll have more sunlight than anybody else. But first, we're going to take advantage of those shorter days. We're going to have huge light demonstrations. It's an incredible time to come and go aurora viewing. It's really going to be incredible to see how this works in the first year, and I'm excited to welcome everybody for Hay Days 2025. The one that people are most familiar with maybe is the Iditarod, and that's a great time to come up because it also pairs with a less well-known but loved by locals, the Anchorage Fur Rendezvous. So if you've ever wanted to go running with an actual reindeer chasing you, I've done that. I haven't done Veilbreaker yet, but I have run with the reindeer. It's an incredible time to come up. It's the end of March. It's the beginning of, it's the end of February, the beginning of March. You've still got snow on the ground. You've got more light than any place else in the country by that time. So you get winter, but you get the end of winter. You get the brightness. The NYO games are one that I don't think is on a huge number of radars. That's why I've taken the picture that we've added here. So this is Indigenous Games of Alaska. It's open to anybody from Alaska. All Alaska students are eligible to participate. And the games themselves are derived from practices that were typically used to keep people sharp. So if you were worried about needing to be able to jump very quickly from ice floe to ice floe as you were out on the frozen Chukchi Sea, this is all of these games test reflexes and abilities, and I'm not doing it any justice. If you've never seen somebody put one hand on the floor and balance their entire body weight on top of that one hand, and then with their other hand reach up and touch a ball behind them, and then maintain their balance until the ball stops moving. Like, this is just a tremendous display of athleticism. Um, this woman is kicking way higher than my head by a long shot. I cannot do that. Everybody knows summer solstice. Summer solstice in Anchorage is about 22 hours from sunrise to sunset. We make the most of that very, very long day. We have summer solstice celebrations downtown, hosted by the Downtown Partnership. It's also when the Mayor's Marathon is run. So if you're looking for a half marathon or a full marathon, or you've got a buddy that you can trick into doing a relay race with you, it's one of my favorites. July 3rd and 4th in Anchorage for Independence Day, and that feeds right into an event in Girdwood, Girdwood Forest Fair. It's another really great time to come up if you're not sure when to visit. Again, I'm showing my cards here. I've included 2 runs, Anchorage Run Fest in August. If you're trying to get a personal best, August is just an amazing temperature here. It's usually in the mid 50s to mid 60s. Nice. If you're worried about overheating on a run, this is the one to do. And then in the middle of October, I don't normally include conventions, but the Alaska Federation of Natives is one. It's the largest convention in the whole state of Alaska. Something between 3,000 and 5,000 people come to AFN. Why I include it here is they have just an absolutely incredible Alaska Native Arts Fair. It's a must-see, and most of the rest of the convention schedule is open to the public for observation. So if you're not really sure how to get into Alaska Native cultures, this is a really incredible opportunity. Can't miss it. And that kind of leads us into one of 3 of the big travel trends that I wanted to unpack a little bit. These are kind of things that we see in Anchorage travel, but to be honest with you, I think a lot of places are seeing kind of similar trends. This is really exciting. Cultural tourism is everywhere. It means that we get to make person-to-person connections as Alaskans and really share the many, many different threads that make up the story of Anchorage. So we talked a little bit about Dena'ina Athabascans. That photo on the right is actually the Indigenous Place Names Project. So this is 30 sites that they've identified across Anchorage, and they've identified the traditional Dena'ina Athabascan name for that place. So this happens to be at Point Woronzof, but we should all be calling it Nuch Ishtunt, which is the place that is shielded from the wind. So I think what's interesting to me about the Indigenous Place Names Project is it really gets down to, like, it's almost like you're seeing the source code of a place. You're really understanding what made Anchorage Anchorage before Anchorage even existed. I think this focus on cultural tourism pops up in the public art. That photo down there on the left is a statue down near Ship Creek called Grandma Olga. This is a real person. And I think what's nice about it is she is depicted at a fish camp, and that's exactly what was down in that area for hundreds and even thousands of years. It's evident in our events. We talked about the NYO Games and Alaska Federation of Natives. We talked about Shane and Blueberry Tours and sharing a little bit of what it's like to be an Inupiaq man living in Anchorage. It's in our shopping. That one kind of lower right there, that's a smoke ring that is knit by a network of Alaska Native knitters from all over the state. And there's a little shop downtown called Mi'kmaq. And the fun thing about this knitting is it's all made out of muskox wool. Again, shout out to my favorite Alaska animal, the muskox. It's just, there are so many different ways that we've seen this. We've talked about the Alaska Native Heritage Center and the work that they're doing. I think the other thing that's really interesting is cultural tourism isn't just about Alaska Native cultures. Very recently, within the last couple of days, the Anchorage School District released a news article that said all of the students in the Anchorage School District, most of them speak English. The languages that are spoken other than English, either by the students or in their homes, there's about 112 different languages that the school district identifies as being spoken by at least one kid. So the top languages other than English, Spanish, Samoan, Filipino, Hmong, also Yupik, which is traditionally spoken in Western Alaska. So I think that just speaks to the kind of cultural diversity that you get in Anchorage. This is a place that's long drawn people who are just looking for opportunity. And that means we get all of that. We get Alaska Native cultures, and we get Somali restaurateurs, and we get, Inupiaq tour guides, and former military kids like me. Again, I don't think this is specific to Anchorage, but I'm proud to say that we've seen a lot of change and a lot of thought put into traveling responsibly and sustainable trips in Alaska. We live in a special place, and we always have. There's a huge burden on us to balance that place and make sure that, I think of it like the first time I went camping, somebody told me that I had to leave the campsite at least as good as I found it, if not better. And I think that's at the heart of why Alaskans care about sustainable travel. We see operators removing sustainable, single-use plastics. Salmonberry Tours actually started doing all of their trips where you are drinking out of glasses that they reuse and rewash every time. So um, I'd like to also point out that all of the South Central Alaska ports have plans to electrify so that the cruise ships that we get, which is about half of the visitors that we get in the summertime in Anchorage, all of those cruise ships, instead of idling with their engines running in port, they'll be able to plug in and run off the local power grid. I think that's really encouraging. One other trend that is a little bit more Alaska specific, perhaps, off-peak visitation has been a huge area for growth for us. So most people know Alaska because of the summer. We've seen a tremendous amount of appetite and interest in traveling from mid-September through April. And the way I like to think of that time of year is you kind of get the insider access. You get to jump the queue a little bit. What do you do during winters in Alaska? Well, you snowshoe, you fat tire bike, I cross country ski. It's also a great time to come up. We have Broadway in Alaska. We have a local opera company, and we have a symphony orchestra that predates statehood. So there's an absolutely fantastic cultural tapestry here that I think is best experienced if you're coming not in the summer months, if you're coming from late September to early April. That's really when these things kick off. And Northern Lights viewing, I think, especially now and in the next couple of years, like we're at solar maximum, and that means every place that has good aurora viewing is dialed up to 11. Um, I think what makes Anchorage a top aurora viewing destination, we're still under the auroral oval, even though we're a little bit farther south. We have some really great operators who've added a lot of overnight aurora viewing tours. Actually, Great Land Tours just added Wi-Fi to all of their vehicles so that people could not only could their driver get real-time stats on where the aurora is and where the best viewing is, but it also means that you can post your photos the second that you get the best aurora photo ever. Other things that I think set us apart for viewing, I mean, that photo says it all. You get mountains and rivers and inlet backdrops in ways that you don't get in other places. Some other places it's just flat. You'll get snowfield, sky. Um, that variance in landscapes also means that there are a lot of different weather conditions on any given night across Anchorage. And so it's easier to find those clear skies in the one place. If it doesn't look like it's panning out to the south of Anchorage, you might slide up north and go there instead. And then, frankly, there's just a lot to see and do during the day. So if the weather isn't cooperating, you're not just here for aurora viewing, you're going dog sledding or snowshoeing or checking out the museum. There's just a ton to do even during the day. I could go on and on about air service if you're curious about how to get here. During the peak of summer, we get more than 60 flights a day to Anchorage just from Alaska Airlines alone. There's a flight every hour from Seattle. There's options to Portland and Los Angeles. I love the flights to Hawaii, Chicago, Denver, Las Vegas, Minneapolis, New York, JFK. That was new last summer. Phoenix, Salt Lake City, American, Delta, they also fly to a lot of those places. They also have Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas. It's just a ton of route options. And I was really excited to see just a little while ago, we learned that WestJet will be flying direct from Anchorage and in between Anchorage and Calgary. And Canadians visit Anchorage more than any other country. We also have 2 direct flights to Frankfurt, Germany. So if you're ever looking for just like a globe trotting way to get around, direct over the poles to Frankfurt, Germany is about 9.5 to 10 hours, depending on the day. And it's one of my favorite little travel hacks of being in Anchorage. You're so close to a lot of places that people consider like a very long way away. So I've got friends who used to fly to Japan just because they could in 5 or 6 hours. And I love I had a German teacher as a kid who would decide between visiting her in-laws in Pittsburgh or going to Munich, because for her, living in Anchorage, those 2 things are about the same travel distance. And it's just incredible to have that kind of access from this corner of the world. I think my voice is finally starting to fade, and so I'll just say that if you're looking for more information, our website is anchorage.net. If you want to order a guide, we actually do free mailings of the official guide to Anchorage. We also have a function on our website called Ask a Local. This is not a chat GPT thing. This is a real Alaskan who will answer your travel questions. And of course, you can always find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the usual places. And that's us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so while you remove the slide so we can chat and do some Q&A, I do want to point out, do not use Chat GPT to plan your Alaska trip. Like I could go on about that for 40 minutes, like you can go on about Anchorage for 40 minutes at minimum. It hallucinates like crazy. It's trying, but like there's so many better resources. Anchorage.net, the locals, there's phones. I know phones still exist. You can pick up the phone and talk to an Alaskan on the phone if you have a question. And speaking of questions, quick reminder, if you're watching this, you can ask questions in the comments, but I want to get to the questions that we received in advance. So let's jump right in. The first one that I have comes from Sarah. She is curious. I'm going to I was kind of annotate questions. So the first thing is, what can you do without a car? And then I'm going to annotate saying, how do you get around if you don't have a car?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. It's so easy to get sucked into that idea of this being a huge place, and it is. But I think what Anchorage's superpower is the transportation, all of the transportation for all of Alaska, all, just a ton of it flows through us here in Anchorage. So if you're not traveling with a car, my first piece of advice is maybe base yourself out of downtown Anchorage for at least a couple of days. And here's why. You're close to the Anchorage Museum. You're at the center of all of the restaurants. A huge amount of stuff is just packed into this, 60 block area that's really, really walkable. You're not going to get lost. When they laid out this, they had an engineer do it. All the streets are north and south. All of the ones that run east to west are numbered. All the ones that run north to south are letters. You really can't. It's like playing Battleship with a map. It's really easy to get around. The other thing that I think is helpful about starting in downtown Anchorage is so many of the tours and trips start out of downtown Anchorage. There's a flurry of stuff that their jumping off point is 4th Avenue and F Street, right in front of the visitor information centers. So that opens up visits to the Alaska Native Heritage Center, visits to the Alaska Zoo, to the Aviation Museum, which we haven't talked about just yet. There's a ton of stuff that you can do, and you're also, when you get bored of that, you're a short shuttle ride away from Lake Hood Seaplane Base. You're also within walking distance to the Alaska Railroad. So there's a lot of stuff that you can knit together without needing a car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I always say that you don't need a car in the Anchorage area. You might want a car once you start to go to Seward or head up north toward Denali, but you don't need a car to visit Anchorage. So actually save that money. Don't pick it up till you plan to leave town, especially because parking downtown can be, it's not a city where like the hotels all have a parking garage. It's not that kind of city. So just save the money on the car rental for the few days that you're in town, and then, get it when you're going to head out of town. Speaking of a few days in town, Libby was curious. I actually love this question. So Libby wants to know, if you only have 2 days, what would you say is the priority? But I love this question because I feel like most people don't even spend 2 days. And so I love that she's like, 2 days isn't enough, because I agree 2 days isn't enough, but most people don't even spend 2 days. So if you've got 2 days to do the greatest hits, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're keeping score, the average for visitors is to spend about 3.5 days, 3.5
Okay.
overnights on average. And even that, I think you could make an entire week or 10 days here if you really wanted to. There's just a ton that people jump over. So for me, Alaska Native Heritage Center and Anchorage Museum for sure. Chugach State Park, there are a ton of trailheads. Glen Alps is probably the most popular, but Basher or McHugh Creek or the Eagle River Nature Center out in Eagle River.
Mhm.
Um, all of those are really great jumping off points to explore the Chugach. You've got to get a sightseeing flight in there. I love going out of Lake Hood and just not even, so many of the tours, everybody jumps straight to, I've got to go circle Denali in a plane. And it is an incredible experience. But even just getting up and over the Chugach Mountains and down Turning an Arm and into Prince William Sound, like it's just such an incredible view even from there. And you don't have to go with the longer options to get something really incredible out of one of those flights.
Mhm.
I love trips on the Alaska Railroad. My favorite is that trip down to Grandview. If you can spend the time to step off and go to Spencer Glacier, it's one of the only places in the entire Alaska Railroad network that's a whistle stop. So they pull up, you get off, you get to explore this glacial lake with Spencer Glacier in the background. And while you're out there, the train is actually going down to Grandview. So when the train pulls away, the only people at Spencer are the people that got off the train with you. And it's just one of those places that you feel like it's a VIP experience. It's just it's mind blowing to be out there and be out there with a total of like 10 people.
Great ones. I am really bummed. I was supposed to do Spencer Glacier in August of 2023, and it ended up falling through last minute due to some family stuff that was going on. But that's the one route that I haven't done on the Alaska Railroad. I've been on the Coastal Classic, which
Oh
passes
gosh.
by Spencer Glacier, but I haven't done the whistle stop experience. So yeah, we. By the way, if you're watching this and you're curious about the train, um, look up in that upper corner of the screen. You will see a little pop up. You can head on over to the video that I did with Robin from the Alaska Railroad. Okay, moving right along. Rita and I have talked a lot about dog-friendly Alaska, and so I've been asking this question to all the destinations because I think it's relevant not just for Rita, but for a lot of folks who come up and have a little bit longer. They might bring their pet with them, their dog with them, and so what tips do you have for dog-friendly Anchorage?
Well, I'd start with the dog parks. So Connors Bog and University Lake in Anchorage are just absolutely synonymous with locals and their dogs. There's a spot in Valley of the Moon Park that was an old baseball stadium that they converted into a dog run. We like our dogs. Actually, if you look very closely at the paved trail system, there are a couple of places where the signage is not only for humans, there's also a dog translation. So we like our dogs. Um, my only my only polite ask is in Anchorage, it's always leashed on trails. Out in the Chugach, they have to be under voice control. So just keep in mind if your dog's not really good at minding you, you'll want to keep them on a leash.
And that's really for their own safety as much as other people too, because there's wildlife all over Anchorage, as you saw from the pictures. So you want to make sure your
Yeah, if
dog is going to be safe out there.
absolutely. If you have a brave little terrier who's going to go and bark at moose, they do tend to bring those moose back to you and not in good moods.
Yep, yep. Okay, next question I have. Let's go. Speaking of wildlife, Muriel was curious for bear viewing. I'm going to say
Yeah,
safe bear viewing. Let's go with that. Not just bear. We don't just want to encounter bears. We want safe bear
right.
viewing.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. Like, every place that you travel in Alaska is bear country, and that shouldn't scare you at all. You should just be able to know that you should travel with respect. You should be mindful of going. If you're here's what we'll start with. If you're worried about encountering a bear and you don't want to see one out in the wild, if you travel, if you're going to hike, don't go in the evening or early hours. You always travel with people. You make noise. I've lived in Alaska for a huge portion of my life, and the number of times that I've seen bears in the wild when I'm doing it right, I think there's one or two times. Um, for bear viewing, safe bear viewing in and around Anchorage, the Wildlife Conservation Center and the Alaska Zoo are my two first go-tos. Particularly the Wildlife Conservation Center, the backdrops are just incredible. If you've got any photographers traveling with you, it just makes for the best photos ever. Um, if you were going to go a little bit farther beyond that, I would look into places like Lake Clark and Katmai for bear viewing. And there are a couple of flight seeing companies that offer day trips to Lake Clark and Katmai as well. And I think those are my first go-tos when it comes to bear viewing.
Yeah, good ones. Good ones. I agree. Okay, how about this one? I think is a pretty quick question, but maybe not, because I remember it snowing in May once when I was growing up. So when does the snow stop flying on average?
It does stop, the snow does stop flying. And I think that's one of those kind of myth busting things that living in Anchorage, you get this perception of wintry weather. So really, if that's what you're worried about, you want to avoid it at all costs. Mid-May to mid-September, there you're going to get a couple outside edges. Maybe it'll snow on May 20th every couple of years, but by and large, the snow is long gone by then. I think that's really why people choose summer in Alaska. Unless you're into cross country skiing or downhill skiing, in which case, come and talk to me about the other, 6 or 7 months of the year.
Yeah, I remember. Well, I was just there in September of 2024 and went for a hike. End of September, snowed we got up on top of the mountain. It was snowing. And then I remember, as I said, growing up, it was May 11th. I'll never forget because I had a track and field. It was my first track and field meet in middle school. And now I know why I'm not a runner, because there's nothing more miserable than running in the snow when you're not really a runner to begin with, which I am not.
Yeah, and I think mid-September is really me hedging my bets a lot. When I was a kid, it
Yeah.
used to be that you expected it to have snowed at least once by Halloween. So even
Hmm.
after the middle of September, you've really got a little bit of wiggle room. And even before the middle of May, honestly, even on the edges of those, you'd be fine.
Okay, cool. One last question. This one comes from Tracy. Tips for RVing. So, what would you advise? It's a common pickup location. People fly and pick up an RV, but if maybe you're passing through, you brought your own RV, what tips do you have?
Yeah, again, don't look past the state parks. A lot of people, they glom onto those national parks, and they're national parks for a reason. I'm not trying to tell you that they're not, but the state park system here is just absolutely incredible. So I would look into, up north, Denali State Park, really incredible campground that's been built out in the last couple of years. The National Forest Service down in the Chugach, down in the Portage Valley area, there's some incredible RV spots down that way. And then as you get farther afield from there, places like Cooper Landing, Talkeetna, there's some really incredible spots. I think that would be the big thing. And then just don't be afraid to sit and soak for a little while. Like, don't feel like you've got to move every single day. Sometimes it makes sense to just camp out for a couple of days, and you get to see the places that you would have missed otherwise.
Mhm. And there are a couple RV parks in Anchorage, right?
Yeah, there's one at Ship Creek.
Okay.
There's one in
Yeah.
Midtown. There are a couple of
Okay.
options right here in town
Okay.
as well. So
I
again,
was
don't.
just researching that. So I actually knew the answer, but I wanted to make sure we covered it because you can actually come into Ship Creek's, I think, a great one if you can get a spot there because you're right downtown. You can walk anywhere you want to go, just like everything else we've been talking about.
Yeah, speaking of which, the Coho parking lot actually has a couple of oversized parking spaces in the summer too. So don't be afraid to bring it downtown. Just know that with a little bit of advanced research, you can find those spots that either allow you to take an oversized vehicle, or there are a couple of meters. Most of the meters in Anchorage are for 2 hours. There are some that are a little bit outside of downtown that go as long as 10.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. Thank you. Well, I think that will wrap it up here. Want to say, first of all, thank you so much, Jack, for joining me. And then again, if you have any more questions, put them in the comments. Additionally, as you scroll down beneath this video, you will find the caption where I've included the link to visit Anchorage, anchorage.net. I've included links to their social media so you can go follow because it is truly inspiring. I see it every day in my feeds and I never get tired of it. And I grew up there, so that says something. And then I also included a couple links that I have for visiting Anchorage based on my experiences, my trips that I've taken there. And I think that just about covers it. So thanks so much for joining me. Thank you again, Jack. I really appreciate you taking the time to teach us all about Anchorage.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.